This past week, we got the 6th issue of Tim Drake Robin from Meghan Fitzmartin. The sales are just absolutely abysmal on the series, and why wouldn't they be? It's got terrible writing with even, well, maybe not worse art, but the art is just as bad as the crappy writing, and it should be a warning to all comic book publishers out there. You can't just hand these characters out willy-nilly. Meghan Fitzmartin has done nothing to establish herself as a comic book writer within the industry. Certainly not anyone warranting a spot on a Batman-related character at DC Comics. There's a lot of fans of this particular character. The problem is we're not reading Tim Drake Robin, and the stories that Meghan Fitzmartin is trying to tell within this Tim Drake Robin story really aren't resonating with Tim Drake fans. Obviously, the art doesn't help. I was going to review the issue, but it was just so bad, and I reviewed a few, and I'm sure I'm going to get to it. But thankfully, there was an interview this week with Adventures in Poor Taste and Meghan Fitzmartin. It shines a spotlight on why this isn't working. Meghan Fitzmartin has no idea what she's actually doing, number one. Number two, she has no idea what comic book fans actually want to consume in their superhero comic books. Shockingly, fans of superhero comics just aren't all that into LGBTQ coming-of-age stories. There's actually a demographic for each one. Is there some crossover there? Absolutely, but it's just a little bit of crossover. There ain't a whole lot of people that are actually looking for both in the same exact story, and that's why we get to this. And quite frankly, and I'll show you here at one spot, Meghan Fitzmartin comes off as a really, fake person, insincere. Like when she speaks, you can tell nothing that she's saying is real. And this cover, oh my God, this cover is just absolutely terrible. What superhero comic book fan that likes Tim Drake is ever going to want to buy this comic book cover? I would be shocked if comic book retailers weren't sending this thing back, because no one is ever going to want to read this. And another thing that comes across really clear within this interview is just what a bunch of fangirls Adventures in Poor Taste are. The reviews for this series have been abysmal since the very first issue. I think there are 60 reviews, so there's on average 10 reviews per issue. New comic books don't get scored like this, ever, especially from Marvel and DC. But this particular comic has been so egregiously bad that even from the get-go, even the shill sites were having to admit that it sucks. But if you listen to the interview from Adventures in Poor Taste, you would think that they were talking to Alan fucking Moore here, or somebody that had written something really iconic. You can't take any of these sites seriously, especially Adventures in Poor Taste. Like, grow up, stop being a bunch of fangirls, and have some journalistic integrity. I know you want to be a part of the industry, but you also want your readership to take you seriously. This is their first question. Do you think Tim is on the way to considering a new form of a moniker for himself? This is what Meghan Fitzmartin has to say. I think there's some really cool things we'll get to see Tim grow in and learn, but with everything, what you want from any good story, you want it to be organic and making sure that we as storytellers are seeding those. I could give two shits if they give Tim Drake a new moniker. Is he Red Robin? Is he Drake? Whatever. Who cares? He's Robin at this point. But the answer itself, well, you got to be organic with your storytelling. It's like, there's nothing less organic in the fucking world than Meghan Fitzmartin's Tim Drake Robin. The first time she writes a character, he goes, oh, I think I like boys. The second issue, he's like, I do like boys. I need to ask this boy on a date. And then all of a sudden he's just gay. It's the most inorganic storytelling in the history of the world. Yet she's like, yeah, we've always got to have organic storytelling. It's always got to move there, in a way that makes sense. Nothing about this entire run has made any sense. And you can see Meghan Fitzmartin, the writer, is completely clueless, completely unself-aware of what has actually happened here and the feedback she's actually gotten. And not just Meghan Fitzmartin, but certainly DC Comics and Jim Lee, to the changes made to Tim Drake in the series. Nothing feels organic. And you can tell during this interview, which is probably the worst part about all of this, is Meghan Fitzmartin feels like she has ownership of Tim Drake Robin and the future stories that are going to be told with that character, despite not creating the character, despite having no really successful run with the character, no story that people turn to and go like, that's Tim Drake. If you want to know who Tim Drake is, that's the story you have to read. The only thing anyone says about Meghan Fitzmartin and Tim Drake is, oh my God, don't read that. Can we please retcon everything soonest? Yet she feels like this is her character now. And that is an enormous problem for Jim Lee and DC Comics. And a warning not just to DC, not just to Marvel, but to anybody. Do not let these soulless corporations ever get their hands on your IP. They will destroy everything that you ever did with it because they're not there for the great stories for Tim Drake. They're not there because they like the DC universe or whatever they're working with. They're there to make their fucking point, and their point has nothing to do with entertaining the fans. It's to get across their own personal agendas with the characters and the universes that they've been handed. And that's really the warning that everyone should be paying attention to, should be heeding for the future of all entertainment, not just comic books. The second question I'll mention, has there been an active conversation between you and Chip Zdarsky since Tim's popping up in the backups every now and then of his series? She says, not necessarily, but Chip even sent me an email the other day. He is a really wonderful creator who I love and respect with all of my being. You don't say that about your friend. I love Doc with all of my being. I respect Doug Ernst with all of my being. That's a fucking weird thing to say. She can't even fake being a human being. Yet these are the dipshits that we're putting in charge of these universes and these characters. I defy anyone to read that and be like, you know what? I think Meghan Fitzmartin's a straight shooter. She's really authentic. She doesn't even know how to talk to people to get a point across that, hey, you know what? Chip Zdarsky is a good guy. He's a writer I really admire, and I thought it was great that he reached out to me. She ends up using these lame-ass fake platitudes because she doesn't even know how to communicate with other human beings. I wonder why, when you read one of her comic books, it doesn't feel like human interaction. I wonder why, when you read one of her stories, it doesn't feel like it could ever happen in any universe ever, because she doesn't actually know how to be a human being. There's another set of interesting questions. What goes into your writing process for characters like Bernard and Darcy? She says, I love a ragtag group of individuals who are messy, unique, and just doing their best, trying to find their own way. And letting them have the space to do that has been really important. If you really like that, go read the X-Men and learn how to write a fucking comic book. She continues, so letting Darcy be her sort of crazy, kooky self, and letting Bernard come in and out as it felt accurate to the story. Adventures in Poor Taste later asked, what does Bernard do in his downtime outside of popping in and praying for Tim to come and help him out? She says, learning how not to get kidnapped, I think, is big on Bernard's list of things to do in his downtime. In the next couple of issues, actually, we're going to see a little bit more of Bernard and a little bit more of what he does in his downtime and what he may be going to school for. No one is reading Tim Drake Robin to learn about Bernard. No one fucking cares about that character. He's not fully realized. He's not fully fleshed out. And he has no purpose in the story other than to remind you that Tim Drake is gay and sometimes to be kidnapped. Like, you look at Lois Lane, sure, she's been with Superman for a long time, but she has a pretty key role just within the DC universe, not just with Superman, but with everybody. She's the world's greatest reporter. She's always getting down to the bottom of things. You can actually use her as a plot device to get to new, more exciting parts of the story without having to meander on over there. You can use her for purposes like that. Bernard is nothing to the story at all, other than to say he's in a relationship with Tim Drake and they walk around on twinkle toes all the time. And when you go and you hear from the creators of a character like Bernard, who wasn't supposed to be really vital or key to Tim Drake's place within the DC universe, but he was brought into the universe with a purpose. There was a point for Bernard to be there. And that's another reason this doesn't feel organic, because anyone that's actually read the stories knows why Bernard was there. They know the relationship he had with Tim Drake. And now all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, completely inorganically, he's just all of a sudden making goo-goo eyes and making out with Tim Drake all the time. And now we're going to find out more about Bernard. I wonder why nobody in their right mind would ever want to pay for this goddamn comic book. It looks awful. And for some reason, Bernard's being treated like an important figure. It's almost like Superman, Son of Kal-El all over again, where all of a sudden John Kent becoming Superman should be the story being told. He goes to the back burner so Jay Nakamura can be introduced, serve no real functioning purpose in there other than to be John Kent's boyfriend, but actually become the focus of the story itself. Get a fucking clue, Meghan Fitzmartin. You need to go talk to comic book readers and find out what they actually like. What you think is cool and what actually sells comic books and puts asses in seats are two completely different things. Like, it couldn't be more apparent. The final question I'll wrap up with, what do you think readers can look forward to in the future for the series? I know we've seen through the solicits a little team up here continuing the mystery theme, but what can we look forward to reading for Tim's life? I think we'll get to see a bit more of Bernard and how Bernard plays in it. I think we'll see a familiar villain pop back up. And through all of that, how Tim's going to continue living in the gray spaces. If they haven't already canceled it already, and I firmly believe that they have, that's what I've been told, this thing isn't going to go past 10 issues. There's no future for this series, and you can see why when I'm reading what she's talking about. We're going to learn more about Bernard and Tim living in the gray spaces, but there's going to be a familiar villain that pops up. There's nothing there that's worth investing in. There's nothing there for a superhero comic book fan, a DC comic reader, a Tim Drake fan to actually latch onto and be like, yeah, that's what I was looking forward to. Because this has nothing to do with Tim Drake Robin. This has nothing to do with DC Comics. This has nothing to do with the DC universe or the Bat family or whatever. This is just so Meghan Fitzmartin can stroke her ego and say, yeah, I turned a DC character queer. Yeah, you might get an interview here and there, and maybe you made a headline. And in 2 years, you're not going to be hired by anybody because no one will buy your comic books. And that'll be the end of it. You'll be back to getting people coffee for future seasons of Supernatural whenever they decide to bring that back. And that's what Meghan Fitzmartin's future is in comic books. There is no future, just like there isn't a future, probably for Tim Drake anymore whatsoever after all the damage that she's done. And this isn't the only thing that Meghan Fitzmartin has ruined within the DC Comics universe. If you were reading Dark Crisis and you actually bought the tie-ins, there was a Young Justice series that was so terrible, so egregious, so flagrantly bad. I think she should have been fired on the spot just for that. Definitely check this out. If you want some more Thinking Critical, there's also a link in the video description.